Lakota chief was the last warrior of his generation. A widow stayed to bury him with honor. I want to tell you about the winter I stopped dying. Not stopped being sick. I was sick a long time after that, and some days I am sick still, though the sickness has changed its nature. What I mean is I stopped moving toward death like a man walking into a river on purpose. Stopped putting one foot in front of the other in that direction. And the reason I stopped, the only reason, was a woman named Margaret finds the road, though her given name from her mother was something softer, and I will not say it here because I was never asked to. She was a widow. I was a man who had outlived everyone he ever loved, which is close to the same thing. Let me go back to October. I remember the morning I counted them. Not because I have a habit of counting, but because my grandson had come the week before and asked me how many of my generation were left, and I had told him I did not know, and that bothered me more than I let on. So I sat on the porch steps with my coffee going cold and I went through the names. Amos Spotted Tail, gone in the spring. Walter Two Bulls, gone the February before that. Clement High Eagle, gone before the last election, which meant gone 3 years, and I had somehow not noticed 3 years passing. Frank Goodroad, Jerome Whirlwind Horse, Thomas Little Shield, who I had not liked and had argued with for 40 years and who I missed like a tooth. 9 of us had ridden to the agency together as boys. 7 of us had survived the schools. 6 of us had come back. I was the last. There is something that happens in a man when he becomes the last of something. It is not grief exactly, though grief is in it. It is more like you become the container of a thing that has nowhere else to go. You carry all of it. Every memory that does not live in you anymore lives nowhere. Every shared story that no one else can confirm. The way Jerome used to whistle a certain low note when he was about to say something funny. The look on Amos's face at a particular moment in 1959 that I have carried for 60 years, and that will vanish from the world entirely the moment I am done with it. These things exist only in me now, which means I am not only myself. I am 9 men. I am the last place they live. That is a heavy thing. And I had been carrying it on a bad body for 3 years. The diabetes, which my doctor called manageable and which I called a slow theft. The left knee that the cold found first every morning before I even opened my eyes. I knew the weather by that knee now, which was the one thing about it that pleased me. A back that had been honest about its condition since my mid-50s and was now simply truthful in the way a broken clock is truthful. All the time, whether I wanted to hear it or not. I was 71 years old. I lived in my mother's house, which had been my grandmother's house before that, out past the edge of the town where the reservation met the hills. 3 rooms, a wood stove that I had to beat on sometimes in the mornings to convince it. A porch that faced east, which meant I could watch the sun come up if I wanted, and most mornings I did not want, but some mornings I did. My daughter Rosalie called every Sunday from Rapid City. My grandson Elias came out when his work let him, which was once a month if I was lucky. I had a neighbor, old Devin struck by, a quarter mile down the road, but Devin had his own troubles and we mostly just nodded when we passed each other's trucks. I was not unhappy. I want to be clear about that. I had lived a life. I had led men. I had buried a wife, my Clara, 12 years gone now, and I had learned that grief does not kill a man. It only changes the shape of him, and the new shape is not worse, just different. I had lived long enough to know that different is not the same as worse. But I was lonely in a way I would not have known how to say out loud. The kind of lonely that settles so quietly you stop feeling it as an ache and start feeling it as the simple texture of every day. Loneliness becomes normal, becomes the water you swim in. You stop noticing the wet. And I was tired, not sleepy, tired down in the place where decisions get made, tired of being the last container of 9 men's lives, tired of the knee and the back and the wood stove that needed convincing, tired of Sunday calls that lasted 11 minutes, tired of being the elder everyone brought their problems to and no one thought to ask how I was doing. I had started in those months to wonder when would be a good time to stop. Not to do anything. I want to be clear about that too. I was not planning. I was just letting the thought sit there, entertaining the idea of an exit the way a man stands in a doorway on a cold day and thinks about stepping out. That was where I was in October. Margaret finds the road pulled into my yard on a Tuesday afternoon in the third week of that month. I heard the truck first, a diesel, and old, with the particular complaint of a truck that has been running cold. I was in the kitchen when it rattled up, and I came to the window and looked out at a blue Ford 3/4 ton that had to be 20 years old if it was a day, rust eating the wheel wells, the passenger side mirror held on with electrical tape. A woman got out. Mid-60s, I guessed later, though I was wrong by a year in the direction of younger. She moved carefully, not slowly. There's a difference. She had the build of a woman who had worked her whole life, wide through the shoulders, deliberate on her feet. Her hair was iron gray and she wore it back, and she had on a canvas coat that was too light for what the sky was saying. She looked at the house. Then she looked at the woodpile, which was low, and at the porch, which had a step I had been meaning to fix since August. She looked at these things the way a woman looks at a problem she is already computing. Then she saw me in the window, and she did not look away or wave or make any of the small gestures people make when they are caught looking. She just kept her eyes on me for a moment, steady, and then she walked to the door and knocked. I did not recognize her. That is the first thing I said when I opened the door. She said, "I know you don't. I'm Margaret Finds the Road. My husband was Leonard Finds the Road, who died in April." I knew Leonard. Not well. He had been younger than me by a decade, a quiet man, a cattleman, good reputation. He had died of a heart thing in the spring, and I had meant to pay respects to his family and had not gotten around to it, and the guilt of that came up in me now and must have shown on my face because she said, "I didn't come about that." "All right," I said. "I came because I need a place to be for a while," she said. "My son-in-law and my daughter, it's a complicated situation. I need somewhere that is not their house. I have my mother's cousin's place, up the hill from yours, the Broken Lance property. I'm going to fix it up and stay there through the winter. I came to introduce myself." The Broken Lance property had been empty for 6 years. It was in worse shape than my woodpile. "It's not in good shape," I said. "I know, I have looked at it." She tilted her head slightly. "Are you going to invite me in, or are we going to stand in the cold?" I invited her in. She stayed about an hour that first time. I made coffee, the real kind, not the decaf my daughter kept buying me, and we sat at the kitchen table and she asked questions about the area, about the road when it snowed, about where the closest hardware store was. She was not making conversation. She was gathering information. There was a precision to the way she asked things, and she listened to the answers with a completeness that I had forgotten people were capable of. At one point I said something. I don't remember exactly what, something about the area, about how things had changed since I was young, and she said, "You sound like you're describing someone else's life." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "You said this used to be about 5 things, and I remember when about 3 things. The present tense you only used for the road conditions and your knee." I sat with that for a moment. "Am I wrong?" she said. "No," I said. She finished her coffee and stood and pulled her coat on, and said she would let me know when she had the Broken Lance place livable enough to move into. She said it like a thing she had already decided. After she left, I sat at the table for a while looking at her cup. She had left a small wet ring on the table and I did not wipe it up for an hour. I don't know why, I just didn't. She was up the hill inside of 2 weeks. How she got that place habitable in October I still don't fully understand. She had her son's help for 3 days, a young man named Curtis who had his father's quietness, and beyond that she seemed to do it herself. I saw her truck go by toward the hardware store in Murdo twice. I saw Curtis's truck up on the hill. Then one evening there was a light in the window of the Broken Lance house, and I knew she was in. She came by the next morning. "I need your help," she said. This was at about 7:30. I had not had my coffee yet. "What kind of help?" I said. "The chimney draw is wrong. The smoke is coming back into the room. I need someone who knows these stoves to look at it." I put my coat on and went up the hill with her. The place was cold but clean. She had swept and washed and aired it, and the walls were still the walls of an abandoned house, but there was order in the clutter, the kind of order that comes from a person who does not waste motion. The stove was a mid-century Heartland box stove, same as mine. I looked at the chimney connection, found where the pipe section had a gap pulling air the wrong direction, packed it right. The fire caught and drew correctly inside of 10 minutes. "Thank you," she said. "It's a common problem with these old stoves in October," I said. "The chimney's cold. You have to let the pipe section heat up before the draw corrects." "I'll remember that," she said, and she would. I already knew she was the kind of person who filed things away correctly and did not have to be told twice. I went home and had my coffee and thought about the gap in that chimney pipe all morning. Not because the repair was interesting, because I had done something with my hands that helped someone, and the feeling of that was larger than it had any right to be. We fell into something after that. Not a routine exactly, it was never arranged or discussed, but things began to happen in a pattern. She would come by in the morning sometimes, not every morning. I would go up the hill and help with the broken lance place sometimes, not every time. She fixed the step on my porch without asking me, which I noticed she had done and did not mention, which I took to mean she had understood something about what I would and wouldn't accept. We talked, not about the big things at first, about the land, about the winter signs, how the rose hips were fat that year, which meant the cold would be hard, about cattle prices, which neither of us kept cattle anymore, but which we had both grown up thinking about and couldn't stop, about her husband. She talked about Leonard without grief that was trying to be seen, just with the plain matter-of-fact tone of someone describing a real person. He had been good with horses. He had been a poor cook and knew it, and had never pretended otherwise. He had had a laugh that was bigger than he was, and she missed the laugh more than most things. "What do you miss about your wife?" she asked me once. "The way she stacked things," I said, and then I had to explain because that sounds like nothing. Clara had had a particular way of stacking things, dishes, firewood, folded laundry, with a precision that was also somehow casual, like the rightness of it cost her nothing. And after she died, I kept finding stacks she had made. Came across them for months. A stack of old letters, a stack of seed catalogs. Each one was like running into her in a hallway. Margaret nodded at this like it was the most sensible thing I had said. She did not say anything. She understood that no comment was the right comment. I did not realize until I was lying in bed that night that I had said Clara's name out loud. I had not done that in a long time. November came in cold. The kind of cold that means business from the first day, not working up to anything, just arriving as a fact. My knee was a barometer now. I always knew the low-pressure systems 3 hours before they showed up, which was something, though the price was higher than I wanted to pay. She showed up one morning in the second week of November with a pot of something, set it on my stove and said, "You can heat that up for lunch. It's bone broth with wild onion. It's good for the joints." I said I didn't need feeding. She said I made too much. Someone has to eat it. I did not argue further. It was, in fact, one of the better things I had eaten in 6 months, and my joints did feel something the next day, though I would not have said so out loud. After that she brought things sometimes. Not always. Not in a way that felt like pity. In a way that felt like she had extra and I was a convenient neighbor who was not going to make a fuss about receiving, which was accurate. Around the 3rd week of November I had a bad few days. The diabetes was doing something it occasionally did in the cold, a swelling in my feet that made walking painful, a fatigue that was different from normal tired, the kind that sits behind your eyes and makes everything look slightly dim. I did not tell anyone. I stayed in the house and let the worst of it pass, which it usually did in 3 or 4 days if I was careful. She knocked on the 4th day. I came to the door and she looked at me and said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "How long?" 4 days, I said. "It's passing." She pushed past me, not rudely, with the confidence of someone who has made a decision and is implementing it. She went to the kitchen and put the kettle on and started looking through my cupboards. "I don't need," I started. "What are you eating?" she said. The answer was, "Not much. I had the energy for toast." She made eggs, made them correctly, with the heat controlled and the yolks still soft, the way they are supposed to be. Set them in front of me and sat across the table and watched me eat without watching me eat, which is a skill some people have. Their eyes are somewhere else but their attention is on you, and you know it, and somehow it is not uncomfortable. "You could have told me," she said. "I don't bother people with it," I said. "I'm not people," she said. "I'm your neighbor." I did not have an answer for that. "You need to bother me with it," she said. "That's what neighbors are for, you know this, you just forgot it." She was right that I knew it. In another time, in my grandmother's time, in the time I had been raised on the edges of a man did not handle illness alone. The community held it. But the community I had been born into had gotten scattered and thin over the decades, and the habit of asking for help had gotten scattered and thin along with it, and what was left was what I had. A man in a cold house eating toast and telling himself it was passing. "I'll tell you next time," I said. She seemed to find that acceptable. She drank her coffee and asked me about the broken Lance chimney, which was doing fine, and she left. I sat looking at my empty plate for a while. The eggs had been real food and I could feel the difference already, a warmth that was not just warmth. Something in me had taken notice. In December the snow came for real. Not the testing snow of November but the settling snow, the kind that makes up its mind and stays. My road drifted in the 3rd week of the month and I spent a morning with the tractor clearing it, which took longer than it should have because my left shoulder was behaving badly, and by noon I was done in a way I was embarrassed to admit. I went in and sat in my chair by the wood stove and did not move for 2 hours. She knocked at 4 o'clock. She came in and saw me in the chair and read the situation instantly. She did not ask what was wrong. She put more wood on the fire and went to the kitchen, and I heard her moving around in there, the sound of the pot I used for soup coming out of the cabinet, water running. "You don't have to," I started. "Hush," she said, not unkindly, just finished with that sentence. I hushed. We ate soup at the kitchen table as it got dark outside. The window above the sink showed just the last gray of the day and then nothing, and the wind was picking up but the house was holding it. She had found some dried corn I had from the garden that summer and put it in the soup, and it tasted like the garden had tasted, something about the sweetness of it that carried the smell of July, which in December is a thing worth having. "Tell me something," I said, "what you would tell me if you thought I could hear it." She looked up at me. "About me," I said. "I mean, you've been watching me since October. You see things. I'd like to know what you see." She was quiet for a moment, not stalling, deciding. "I see a man who has been preparing for a long time," she said. "Not for anything specific, just preparing, putting things in order. Slowing down, letting things go, not in the way of a man who is sick and knows it's coming. In the way of a man who has decided he doesn't need anything else and is getting ready to be done." The fire popped in the other room. "Am I wrong?" she said. That was her question from October, coming back. I looked at my soup bowl, the corn in it that tasted of July. "No," I said, "you're not wrong." She nodded once, like she had known and was not surprised, and there was no judgment in it, just acknowledgement. The way you acknowledge something real. "Well," she said, "I'm not going anywhere." Those 4 words, simple as they were. I can still hear them in her particular register, which was not theatrical or sentimental, which was the voice of a woman who made decisions, and then committed to them, and did not make speeches about what she had decided. 4 words, and then she picked up her spoon and went back to her soup. I had to look away from her for a moment, out the window at the dark in the snow. A man at 71 does not often feel chosen, not in the particular way I mean. I had been respected. I had been needed. I had been, for most of my life, the person people brought their troubles to, the man who helped them figure out what to do. Those things had a warmth to them, but this was different. This was a woman who had come to this corner of the reservation on her own business, for her own reasons, and had seen me in the particular way that people are seen when someone decides they matter. Not because of what they do or what they know or what generation they represent, but because of who they are, the plain fact of them, and had decided to stay near that. I am a man who was taught that crying in front of people is a display, which is not the same as being taught that feeling is weakness. So I looked out the window at the dark until the feeling settled into something I could carry, and then I looked back at her. "I can help you with the broken lance fence in the spring," I said. "The east section looks bad from the road." She looked up at me and something in her face shifted slightly. Something warm came into it, a kind of quiet satisfaction, like a thing clicking into place. "I would appreciate that," she said. That was how it was settled, not with a speech, not with declarations, with a fence that would need fixing in the spring, which was the future, the first future I had mentioned in months. Christmas came and went. My daughter Rosalie came out from Rapid City with her husband and stayed 3 days, which was longer than usual, and I wondered later if she had noticed something different about me, something that made her want to stay close. I introduced her to Margaret when Margaret came by on the 2nd day. Rosalie is a sharp woman. She watched Margaret for about 5 minutes and then she watched me, and I could see her recalibrating something behind her eyes. She did not say anything. She is my daughter and she knows me, which means she knows when to let things be. When she left, she hugged me at the truck in the cold, and she held on for a moment longer than usual, and she said, "You look better, Dad." "It's been a decent fall," I said. "Yeah," she said, "it has." My grandson Elias came out between Christmas and New Year's. He is 24. He has his grandmother's way with silence, which I have always been grateful for. He helped me with the tractor, and we walked the fence line on the south side of my property and talked about his work and about his plans, which were the plans of a young man with many directions available to him, and I listened to them with a pleasure I had not felt in a while. The pleasure of a future that was going to keep going without you in it, and that being good rather than sad. He met Margaret at the road one afternoon, her truck going by, and she slowed and rolled down her window and they talked for a few minutes. I watched from the porch. Elias afterward said, "She seems like a straight shooter." "She is," I said. "Good," he said, and went back to what he was doing. January was the test. January always is out here. We had a week in the middle of the month where the temperature dropped to places it has not gone in years. The kind of cold where you hear the house creak at night from the contraction of the wood, where the windows go opaque with frost on the inside, where starting the tractor in the morning is a negotiation. My woodpile became a concern. I had not stacked enough and I knew it, and had been too stubborn to admit it in the fall, which is the particular stubbornness of a man who has managed his own affairs for 20 years and doesn't easily let himself be found wanting. She noticed on day 2 of the cold snap. She came by and looked at the woodpile and said, "I have extra. I stacked double." "I'll manage," I said. "You'll manage," she said, "and then you'll be cold. Come help me carry some down." We carried 4 loads down the hill in her truck. I drove and she rode, because my shoulder was still not right and she wouldn't hear of me lifting. At the 2nd load I said, "I should have stacked more in the fall." "Yes," she said. I wasn't thinking about January much in the fall, I said. She was quiet a moment. I know. She knew. She had seen me in October, standing in the doorway thinking about stepping out. She had known since then what it meant when a man doesn't stack extra wood, when he doesn't fix the step, when he talks about everything in the past tense. I'm stacking extra next year, I said. I know, she said again. And there was something in those two words, the second time she said them, in a different sense, that was the warmest thing I had felt in 12 years. Not since Clara had said something to me I am not going to repeat here, a thing she said in the same kitchen on a winter evening when she looked at me in a particular way and said it plainly and without fanfare. I had thought that kind of warmth was done for me, sealed up with her. I was wrong. That is the surprising thing about being 71. You find out you were wrong about what was finished. In February, I woke up one morning in the early dark and lay there listening to the house, and I thought about the 9 men. I went through their names the way I have gone through them every morning for 3 years. The roll call, I thought of it, the way you call roll to know who is absent. But this morning something was different. This morning I was not only accounting for absence, I was carrying them forward. It is a thing I had not thought of that way before. I had been thinking of myself as the last container, the place where they lived until I was done, and then they would be gone. But that is not right. I was not the end of them. I was the current keeper. That is different. I carry Jerome's whistle and Thomas Little Shield's particular way of arguing and Amos's way of reading weather and Walter's jokes that always ran a little long, and I carry them not to hold them until I fall but to pass them on. To tell them to Elias, who would tell them to his children, who would tell them on. A keeper is not the last stop. A keeper is a link. I lay there in the early dark and felt the difference of that, and it was not small. I got up and made my coffee and sat at the kitchen table with the first light coming through the window over the sink, and I took out a piece of paper and started writing down Jerome's whistle. Not the whistle, you can't write a whistle, but a description of it, when he used it, what it meant. One note, low and easy, just before a punch line. I wrote that down. I wrote down Thomas Little Shield's arguing style, which was to agree with everything you said first and then very quietly take it apart piece by piece, so that by the end you were defending positions you hadn't known you'd taken. I wrote down 3 of Walter's jokes, full, the way he told them. I was still writing when she knocked at 8:30. She came in and saw the papers spread on the table and stood there a moment. "What are you doing?" she said. "Writing things down," I said. "People I knew, things I don't want to forget to pass on." She looked at the papers, looked at me. "Can I read them?" she said. "Later," I said. "Right now I'm still writing." She made coffee without being asked. She had learned which cabinet, which pot, and sat at the other end of the table and did something of her own, some letter she had brought while I wrote. We were quiet together for an hour in the morning light. Her pen moved. My pen moved. The wood stove did its work. That hour is one of the things I will keep with me until I am done keeping. 2 old people at a kitchen table in February, the cold pressed against the windows, each of them doing the quiet work of their own life. Together in the ordinary way that is not ordinary at all once you have been without it for 12 years. Spring came the way it always comes up here, grudgingly with setbacks, offering warmth and then taking it back for another week, so that when the real thaw finally arrives you have been through enough fall starts not to entirely trust it. But it does come. It always does. I started on the east fence of the Broken Lance property in the 3rd week of April. My shoulder was better. The knee was its usual self, honest, predictable in its complaints, manageable if you planned around it. I dug the first post hole on a clear morning when the sky was the blue you only get up here in April, that particular blue that has some cold still in it, and the smell of the ground coming up from below was something I had nearly forgotten, that dark smell of earth thawing, iron and root and water that has been held and is now moving again. She brought coffee out to me mid-morning and stood and looked at the fence line and said what needed to happen, and I said what I was planning to do, and we agreed on most of it. "You know fences," I said. "I grew up fencing," she said. "Leonard couldn't keep wire tight for anything. I did most of it." She stayed and helped stretch wire for 2 hours. She had Leonard's wire stretcher, an old one, well kept. She knew what she was doing. We worked without talking much. That is the thing about real work, physical work with a purpose. It fills a silence in a way that is comfortable, because the silence is not empty, it is occupied. We were both occupied. We moved around each other without getting in each other's way, which takes time to learn with a person, and I realized at some point during that morning that we had learned it without noticing. At noon, we sat on the tailgate of her truck and ate sandwiches she had made. The sun was warm enough that we had both taken our coats off. The land below the hill was doing what land does in April, coming back to itself, the green finding its way through the gray. "I want to ask you something," I said. "All right," she said. "Why did you come to that door in October?" I said. "You could have introduced yourself any time. You had been here 2 weeks before you came." She chewed a bite of sandwich and looked out at the hill. "Because I had seen you on your porch twice," she said, "and both times you were watching the east, not looking at anything, watching in the way you watch when you're waiting for something. And the second time I thought, that's a man who is thinking about a direction. I didn't know what direction, but I thought I should come by." She looked at me. "Was I wrong?" she said. 3 times now, the same question. "No," I said, "you were not wrong." She nodded once and looked back out at the land. "I lost my husband in April," she said, "and my mother the year before, and my sister the year before that. I know what it looks like when a person is deciding about direction. I've thought about that direction myself." I had not known that. She had never said it directly before. "And," I said, "and I have a fence that needs fixing," she said, "and so do you, so." That was the whole of it. Not a speech, not a declaration, just the fence and the spring and what needed doing. 2 people who had been thinking about the direction of no return and had instead found each other with fences to fix and corners to mend and the ground thawing under their feet. I looked at her for a moment. Looked at her in the way I had not looked at a woman in 12 years, not as a neighbor, not as a kindness, but as a person whose presence in my life was something I could not imagine doing without. She was sitting in the April light with her coat folded across her knees and a bit of sandwich in her hand, and her iron-gray hair catching the wind, and she was the most real thing I had seen in a long time. She felt me looking and turned. I did not say anything. She did not say anything. She reached over and put her hand on my forearm on the canvas of my coat sleeve and held it there for a moment. Just that. Her hand and the weight of it and the warmth of it through the canvas. Then she said, "We should get the next 2 posts in before the light goes." "Yeah," I said. We got down from the tailgate and went back to work. This is what I want to tell you. If you are a man who is getting older and you think the good things are behind you, they are not necessarily behind you. I am not saying a woman saves a man. I am saying a real person who sees you in the particular way that says, "I am going to stay near you because of who you are." That is a thing that can happen at 71. It can happen when you are the last of your generation. It can happen when you have been grieving for 12 years and you have started to mistake the grief for the end of things. I still carry the 9 men, Jerome's whistle, Thomas's arguing style, Amos and Walter and the others. I carry them every morning, and now I am writing them down so they can travel further than me. That is still my job, and I take it seriously. But I have something else now. A woman who brought her wire stretcher to my fence line in April and worked beside me all morning without needing to be the center of anything, who knocked on my door in October because she saw a man watching the east and decided to interfere, who sat across my kitchen table in December and said I am not going anywhere in a voice that meant exactly what it said, no more and no less. She is not Clara. She is not supposed to be. She is Margaret Finds the Road, who fences better than her husband did and whose bone broth with wild onion is the best thing for a man's joints in the cold, and who has her own griefs that she carries in the plain, no drama way that I have come to recognize as one of the truest kinds of strength there is. We don't make speeches about what we are to each other. We fixed the broken Lance East fence, and then in May we did the South fence too, and in June she helped me replant the kitchen garden that I had let go fallow for 2 years, and in July she took me to see her family at the encampment on the other side of the reservation, and introduced me to people who had known her people for generations, which is a particular kind of introduction, the kind that carries meaning. Her son Curtis looks at me the way a man looks at someone who has moved into the edge of his family without anyone quite deciding when that happened, not with hostility, with the careful assessment of a man who loves his mother and is deciding if this is all right. I think I passed whatever test he is running. He shook my hand firmly at the encampment in July and said, "She seems better," and I said, "So do I," and he nodded like that was the honest transaction it was. I am writing this in October, a year from when she knocked on my door. It is a Tuesday afternoon, and the sky has the particular slant of light that it gets in October, the angle that means the summer is finished and the land is taking account of itself. I am on my porch, which has had the broken step fixed since November, and I can see up the hill to the broken Lance house where her truck is in the yard, and a plume of smoke is coming from the chimney in the correct direction. The woodpile behind my house is stacked to the roof of the lean-to. I started on it in August. I got extra this year because January is not a thing to be caught short on, and I intend to be here for it. I intend to be here for a number of things. I have started thinking about the fence on the north side of her property that she hasn't gotten to, and the kitchen garden in the spring, and whatever the spring brings in general, which I do not know but which I am, for the first time in years, genuinely curious about. I hear her truck start up the hill. She is coming down. I carry 9 men and the memory of a woman I loved for 30 years and the grief that reshaped me into a different man. And I carry all of that with me into this October afternoon on this porch, with the smoke going straight up from her chimney because the draw is right now. I made sure of that. She pulls into the yard and the diesel settles and she gets out and comes to the foot of the porch steps and looks up at me with the particular look she has, direct, unhurried, seeing whatever she is seeing, and says, "You eating tonight or not?" "I'm eating," I said. She goes inside. I sit a moment longer in the October light. The 9 men are with me. Clara is with me in her own way, and a woman who knocked on my door a year ago because she saw me watching the East is in my kitchen doing what she is doing, and that is the shape of this life now. It is a different shape than the one I had before. It is not worse. I told you that different is not worse. I believe that. I get up off the porch and go inside.